Lighting is one of the most important parts of videography, and getting that right is key to making sure your film's at the highest possible quality. But because it's not the sexiest purchase you can make, I feel like a lot of videographers tend to ignore it a little bit. If you like me, you started off as a natural light videographer, and then you sort of invest in some cheaper lights and work your way up. Eventually you work your way up to something like a 60-watt light, which the good news is they're becoming a lot more affordable now, and there's no excuse really not to have one. But the bad news is they can be quite limiting at times. When you start adding diffusion and filters, they can become quite dim for lighting multiple subjects. So then you want to invest in something like a 200-watt light or a 300-watt light, and that's where it gets really, really expensive. That is until the COLBOR CL220. So let's talk about the gist of this light, and let's first talk about the power. Now, in an email to me they said it was 250-watt light, but on Amazon on their website it says 220-watt light. So we're talking somewhere around that, but I'm not exactly sure yet. It's a bi-colour light and it's designed really well, but the idea of course is to keep it to a budget. It's also part of an ecosystem of COLBOR lights. I've also got the CL60, which is a really nice light as well. But you can also group and combine these lights together on the app if you want to use them in conjunction with one another. I don't have the tools or the technical know-how to measure like the lumens and the light accuracy and the colour accuracy of these things, but what I can say is for the value for money, you don't want to get much better than this. The CL220 is significantly bigger than the 60-watt light, as it should be. It's got a Bowens mount on the front, and mine also came with a softbox, which I'll get into. It's got a slot for a NATO rail on the side. I think you can put a V-mount battery on here to power it. On the back there's a control panel with 4 buttons and 2 knobs, and your power supply is underneath that. The light is permanently attached to the mount, and the handle to tighten feels secure, although I'm not sure about the durability of it as it feels a bit plasticky. Turning the light on, you'll hear that fan kick in. You can definitely hear it, but I don't know if it will affect a microphone placed next to the talent during an interview, for example. It's got 3 fan modes: Smart, which adjusts the fan depending on the needs; the Quiet mode, which seems marginally quieter than the Smart mode at resting temperature and locks you at 50% brightness or less; and Performance, which racks the fan up to full blast. Honestly, in Smart mode I've never heard it reach that speed, but I guess it could in a really hot room. You're not going to get away with using sound with the Performance mode on. The left knob controls the colour temperature from 2700 to 6500 Kelvin, and the right knob controls the brightness. At 1% it's still pretty bright, as you can see, and we'll get into some comparisons later. And of course you've got all the standard effects like the fireworks and the flickering bulb and the TV, etc., which you may or may not use, but personally I've never used before. So here's just a couple of brightness tests. We're using a 36-inch diffuser here. The light is about arm's length from me. This is the CL220 at 1% now. We're in S Cinetone 1/100 at ISO 640. This is now the CL60 at 1%, just so you can compare how bright these two lights are at 1%. Don't ask me why we're in ISO 640. I'm used to shooting S-Log. I forgot to change it. That's just how it is. Now onto the CL220 at 25%. You can see it's already much brighter, probably overexposed at the current settings. So we've then gone and changed it to 1/400 rather than 1/100. Just crank the shutter there and try to expose it a little bit better. Now we're back at 1/100 and the CL220 is at 50%, so it's really overexposed, as you can see. This is a CL60 at 50%, which actually looks really good. I probably wouldn't change a hell of a lot here, to be honest. But going back to the CL220, I've corrected the shutter speed, probably a bit too much, to be honest. But now, so we're at 1/640 on this shot. And now we're going nuclear. This is the CL220 at 100%. As you can see, stupidly overexposed. The camera wouldn't even focus on my face at this point. So that's how bright it does go. And that's the CL60 at 100% as well. So you can see it's reasonably good, but as soon as you start adding 2 or more subjects, this is probably not going to light that in the way that you want it to. And now this is back to the CL220 at 100%, except I've cranked the shutter to 1/1000, just to try and get the exposure a bit better. But yeah, the 220 is given a lot more flexibility there. So that's been an overview of some of the features of this light, but now it's time to get into something a bit more important. That's the price to performance, because obviously it's kind of a budget light. It performs really well for a budget light, but how does it compare to the competition in terms of pricing? So starting with one of the brands that people think of when they go to buy lighting, and that's Aperture. And their 300X, while it's probably a little bit more powerful, comes in at £1,036, which is roughly triple what one of these costs. If you come down a bit on budget, you've got the Godox SL300 buy, which is around £500. I'm doing this in pounds, but it's pretty much the same in dollars these days, so I won't worry too much about it. And then you've got the Amaran 200X, which is about £342 at the moment. It's getting closer to the price, but it's a 200 watt, so I don't think it's going to be as bright as something like this. I personally have not used the 200X, so I couldn't tell you any advantages and disadvantages between them. Finally, the COLBOR CL220 is 300 quid or £320 with accessories like the bag and the NATO rail and the spotlight modifier. So it hasn't been the most technical review of a light ever, but here's the bottom line. Yeah, some of the parts could be a bit more premium, and we don't know the light accuracy or the colour accuracy because I'm not Gerald Undone. We also don't really know the longevity of this brand and how long a light like this is going to last from this brand, because it's not really been around long enough to be reported on. But the important thing is the barrier of entry for really good quality lighting is coming down due to brands like this that are producing really good lights at affordable prices, and that can only be a win for the consumer.